Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. This is a special episode of Bitcoin for Introverts. We have with us our special guest, Mr. Bob Cornish, who will have an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the work he's been doing with the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition. But for now, I just wanted to give you guys a little background on this particular episode. We thought it would be good to have someone talk about some of the laws and bills that have been passed in the U.S., particularly Wyoming, because I think they were one of the first ones, at least, or the first ones to come out and talk about all the work they were doing. And I can't remember exactly, but earlier this year, 5 bills were passed. And they were blockchain or cryptocurrency friendly laws. And so we have Mr. Bob Cornish here today to kind of give us a little background and to hopefully tell us what's next for Wyoming. So how about you introduce yourself, Bob?
Hello, everybody. Bob Cornish from the Wilson-Elser Law Firm based in Washington, just like Maureen. Happy to be here and share my experience with the folks in Wyoming. Just to give a little background, I've been practicing law for 25 years and I've had a Wyoming license for 15.
Oh, okay.
I've worked for a family office that had quite a bit of investment here in the state. And in the midst of doing another transaction earlier in the year, I was approached by somebody about what was going on with Wyoming and the blockchain coalition. The reason for that call was that I was working with a crypto investor who was looking to buy a bank in Puerto Rico. And lo and behold, that did not work. But I learned very quickly that things were moving very fast in Wyoming and that I should get involved with the coalition in its efforts to help push the legislation along. Our efforts were really spectacular in that it literally took 4 months or less than 5 months, almost 4.5, from beginning to end to get the legislation through and ultimately to the desk of the governor. I would like to say I had a very large part in it, but I had probably not as large as I would like to, but nonetheless, I have been, very much a resource for the coalition in its efforts to broaden awareness of the legislation in Wyoming, and to also let people know that, the United States does have a blockchain-friendly jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
That is such a big issue when you travel abroad. And first thing that people will talk about, if you say, well, you have a wonderful program or project, why don't you sell it to U.S. residents? And the first thing they'll say is, well, we don't want to deal with the U.S., it's not blockchain friendly. And then they say, well, do you know about Wyoming? And then they'll ask, well, what's Wyoming? And it's Wyoming's a state, and it's friendly to blockchain. And I say, really? And that's kind of what my role has been for the last few months. And I'm actually in Wyoming right now. I just spoke to the Wyoming Bar Association on the legislation. And I'll be coming back to meet with the legislature next week to discuss the latest iteration of the blockchain legislation, which I think is really exciting.
Wow, that is exciting. I have one question because to your point, I also get some of the same questions about, starting or building a blockchain-based or cryptocurrency business outside of the U.S. And their reasoning for not wanting to do it in the U.S. is because it's too difficult or the rules, et cetera. And aside from telling them the small businesses or the businesses who are interested in leveraging blockchain, do you ever encounter attorneys who have, who might not have known about the Wyoming laws, and how do you, I guess, explain that to them?
It's important to let attorneys know that there is this place that is friendly.
Right.
That's one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about, is letting people know that there is this place and people want this business here. It's unique. The state has some unique position in order to, how do I put it? Has a unique position given its history in pioneering LLCs. The LLC was actually first enacted here in Wyoming in 1977. We have some of the, Wyoming has some of the more progressive private banking and trust laws. And, in the crypto world, a lot of cheapest electricity in the United States,
Oh,
a strong population base of people in engineering and math, based from the oil and gas business and the mining business here. You have a university, the University of Wyoming, which is right next door to me right now, where their computer engineering and electronic engineering programs actually have blockchain curricula for people to develop expertise in the field. And their career services office is actually placing people with blockchain ventures. So, if I'm an attorney and I don't know about it, or I meet attorneys that don't know about it, I have to explain to them that, yes, obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and regulation on a federal basis. But if you're going to do this work, I don't think there's a better place to incorporate or to create your ecosystem than Wyoming for a lot of reasons. And we have a utility token exemption here, which is very important. People within Wyoming can trade cryptocurrency freely between one another without being subject to money transmitter or securities laws. We have a virtual currency exemption, which is actually if you're engaged in a fiat alternative. We have a provision that recognizes the sanctity of blockchain shareholder records. Also, the creation of series LLCs to facilitate blockchain ventures. There's a lot of other things that are kind of weaved into the 5 pieces of legislation. But that in and of itself is enough, I think, for most practitioners to leverage, to use, and maybe they don't use all the provisions, but there's enough there that provide enough base for somebody to claim Wyoming as a corporate home.
okay. And so I guess in that sense, it would kind of, compete with Delaware, right? Because Delaware tends to be the main place that any business, regardless of the industry, they register there. And then, so I guess if you had a blockchain-based industry or based business, then Wyoming might be the better place for you to operate. What do you say to some of those who, let's say, they have the business in Wyoming, but yet they live in New York or they live in Florida, and so they have to comply with some of those rules, right? Wouldn't you say that? Because New York has the infamous bit license that's just the bane of people's existence nowadays, and it's pretty expensive for an almost guaranteed rejection. So what do you say to people who are like, well, I would love to create a business in Wyoming, but I live in New York where it's very difficult to operate as a blockchain-based business?
Well, one of the great things about Wyoming is that it's a progressive state in terms of trust and nominee shareholder provisions.
Okay.
Wyoming is one of the few states that statutorily recognizes the ability of shareholders to utilize nominees. That is very useful because if I am a New York resident, I can perhaps nominate a Wyoming trust company to be my nominee for purposes of being a shareholder in the state. I can also form a trust on my own and become a shareholder and be form an entity that makes me a Wyoming resident. Of course, keeping tabs of all the IRS rule, the 80-20 rules, things of that nature. There's nothing that can't be handled in that way. And even so, the one thing we do need to remember that is a big part of Wyoming's structure is that cryptocurrency by statute is not taxed in the state of Wyoming. It's the only state I know that actually provides for it by statute. That's a big deal if you're in New York or Florida, because I mean it's only a matter of time before that bonanza starts with their revenue permits. If your assets are not in New York and Florida and they're in Wyoming, and you structure your things the right way, you can definitely make yourself make yourself a tax efficient investor or venture capital person who is using Wyoming as their base.
Right. That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that, because I do remember there was a time where, the IRS a few years ago had released a notice stating that, certain virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies were considered property. And if you were being compensated with these cryptos, you could be taxed, they could be taxed as income, et cetera. And so I know that made people a little nervous. But it's good to know that at least, state taxes, you'd have some benefit in having your assets, et cetera, be in Wyoming. I remember one of the Wyoming bills was a token bill, and it kind of explained what a token was and how it could be used, and if it met these certain requirements, then it wasn't going to be considered a security. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that was another hot topic for some time, right? That tokens, were they security? Can you securitize a token, et cetera? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I think, when the legislation was drafted, I think a lot of the thinking behind it was based on what SEC people had spoken about at events, I guess in 2017, early 18. And if you heard some of the SEC folks speak, a lot of times the idea of what a utility token was best described by them as as something you put into a jukebox, and you get a you get a product, your music that you want to listen to, and that token is gone forever. And if I bought 5 tokens to put into the jukebox, that would be pretty much a utility token.
Right.
Of course, the SEC hasn't really thought about the fact that that jukebox might be the only jukebox in America that has the new Jennifer Lopez album, and maybe those tokens may actually be worth more than what I paid for them.
Right.
The state of Wyoming, of course, has looked at it in a very different way. They recognize that there is this fine line between utility and security. The utility token certainly can become a security by inadvertent means. That's why the utility token exemption requires that there is actually a utility, or there will be a utility. The other thing is that the issuer, this is very important, the issuer does not undertake affirmative efforts to list their token on an exchange. That means when the token is being issued, it is not being issued for the purpose of exchange listing. And of course, the token cannot be issued for purposes of investment by others, so that it's actually being sold as a pure utility vehicle. Again, you make your representations in your form to the Wyoming Securities Commission and claim the exemption. There are people who have sought to use the utility exemption and really don't have any grounds to claim it. But I think the safest harbor that the exemption contains, I think, is the efforts of the issuer to keep things, to not list on an exchange, recognizing the fact that there may be investors or others who may.
Right. And I mean, is it safe to say that a lot of this does fall on the company or issuer or business owner who is offering these tokens? I think one of the issues has been that I guess people feel like to make it marketable, then they have to promise something. And so then you get into this whole world of, is it security? Is it a commodity, et cetera? And then you know, the backlash or the thought behind, after you find out that it might be considered a security because of how you're offering it, then it's like, well, no, it's a token. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I think there are some very well-meaning issuers out there who start out thinking they're going to be pure utility. And then they start talking to a marketer who decides, yeah, you know, I can get you listed in a Telegram room. I can get you 10,000 visitors in a matter of 2 weeks. And after that, we'll have you listed on 5 exchanges, and all of a sudden you will be hitting pay dirt. And of course, the greed factor kind of kicks in, and, you know, who doesn't want to see their token, you know, actively traded? I don't know. But you know, there is a certain discipline that I guess developers and issuers need to have in terms of really recognizing that, you know, you have to always remember the purpose of this fundraising is to develop your infrastructure. It's to develop your project so that it actually does have utility and function, and that it promises what you say it's going to deliver. You know, doing a straight utility offering is perfectly fine if you believe that, you know, the money you're going to raise is going to, you know, be useful to develop the project, and the tokens you're issuing actually will, you know, be used for their intended purpose. You know, there's nothing to say that somebody may or may not want to pledge or put their tokens on an exchange, but that's kind of out of the hands of the issuer once they're sold.
Right. Well, so that's another question. I guess we might have to broach that topic later about tokens or coins being placed on exchanges outside of the control of the issuer, right? The person who initially created them. But I won't keep you too much longer. But I wanted to know one last question, and then of course you can add anything else you wanted to say that maybe you didn't get a chance to say. So I read this article about the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, and one of the questions in the article was whether Wyoming was trying to become the new blockchain alley, you know, similar to Silicon Alley. What would you say? Do you think that that's the place to be, at least for now? That is the place to go if you want to launch your blockchain-based business?
No doubt.
Okay.
No doubt. The state wants your business here. You know, I'm going to be in Jackson next week with the coalition, meeting with the legislature to actually work on provisions for the next legislative session to make the blockchain legislation even more friendly. One of the things we have learned in Wyoming, and I think any state is going to learn this, is that you can have the best legislation in the world, but if you don't have the infrastructure to implement it, it may not do what you want it to do.
Right.
And, you know, as progressive as Wyoming is in their legislation, it faces the same problem every other state in the United States has in handling cryptocurrency and digital assets, and that's banking. The banking, and, you know, there is no still, you know, being able to safely store and transfer cryptocurrency with some degree of safety that Americans expect. We're going to be taking care of that in the next legislative session. One of the exciting things that's going on in Wyoming, and I'm hopeful that it's going to pass the next session, is the creation of a non-depository bank regulatory scheme here for the creation of banks that will simply be able to hold and transfer cryptocurrency for investors, and both on Main Street and Wall Street. That would totally complete, I think, the ecosystem that the blockchain and crypto industries would need to really make this state, as you say, blockchain alley. It wants to be that.
Okay. That's good to know. I guess, so would you say that if there's this infrastructure is created such that, you know, you can deposit cryptocurrencies and all that, would it kind of function like a custodian, I guess, of these cryptocurrencies? Okay.
Exactly.
So I guess it would fall under a financial institution framework, but it would be like a custodian of those.
It would be somewhat of a cross between a custodial bank and a trust company.
Okay. Okay.
There would still be AML and OFAC and
Right.
probably some bonding requirements, but the one thing that these banks would not be able to do is lend.
Okay.
So nobody's taking your crypto, leveraging it 100 to 1 to borrow. That's not going to be permitted. The ownership structure of the stuff still has to be hammered out in legislation.
Mm-hmm.
If the banking apparatus is here in the state, along with the utility exemption and all the other things we have in the state that Wyoming offers, I don't see any state coming close in the near future to having the to really be a welcoming venue for the blockchain industry in the United States.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome, and I guess I could see how, because I know there are some projects. One of their issues has been, because they've been hacked, right? Because they've had all their coins, let's say, on an exchange or in one place. So to be able to have another location to put some of your cryptos is definitely a good cybersecurity measure, if you ask me, right?
Right.
Not have everything all in one spot. So we might have to have you come back and talk about that once that's passed, because it sounds like the process is pretty quick. If you could get 5 bills in 4.5 months, I feel like you could get one more in like 3 weeks.
From your lips to God's ears.
Right? Well, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. And even though, this is not necessarily a live stream, we'll still share it with our networks. But before we go, please tell us, how can we find you? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Instagram? Are you on LinkedIn? How can people find you?
I am on LinkedIn. I frequently comment to my contacts on issues regarding securities regulation. There is also a Wyoming Blockchain Coalition Telegram room that you may wish to participate in. I don't use Twitter, but usually Telegraph and LinkedIn, and of course you can find me on my law firm's website, www.wilsonelser.com.
Okay, well, thank you. Do you have any last words? Did you want to say one last thing? I know I was supposed to let you do that earlier.
No, as they say in Wyoming, cowboy up, blockchain folks.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. And hope to have you back. And maybe we can do one where we're both in the same room. That would be cool.
That would be great, Maureen. I'd love that. Thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.